Ali Shariati, 1933 to 1977, is one of the most significant thinkers and intellectuals in modern Iranian history. His work not only contributed to the ideological framework of the Iranian Revolution of 1979, but also reshaped the discourse surrounding religion, social justice, and the role of the individual in society. Often described as the ideologue of the revolution, Shariati's teachings resonate with many who seek a fusion of religious belief and progressive politics. His life's work, which blends Marxism, existentialism, and Islamic thought, presents both a critique of the socio-political order of his time and a path toward radical transformation. This video explores Shariati's life, the development of his ideas, and the valuable life lessons that can be drawn from his work. His insistence on the necessity of personal transformation, social responsibility, and an active, revolutionary spirit has remained relevant long after his death. 1. Early life and educational background. Birth and family background. Ali Shariati was born in 1933 in the village of Mazinan, near Mashhad, Iran. His father, Muhammad Taqi Shariati, was a prominent religious scholar who introduced Ali to the world of Islamic teachings from a young age. Growing up in a devout family that valued education and intellectual rigor, Ali was exposed to both traditional Islamic texts and modern intellectual ideas early in life. This combination laid the groundwork for his later work, which sought to reconcile religious faith with contemporary social thought. His mother, who was a significant figure in his life, instilled in him a love of literature, poetry, and philosophy. Shariati's early exposure to both the intellectual heritage of Iran and the religious atmosphere of his home had a lasting impact on his worldview. Early intellectual influences. Shariati's intellectual journey began in Iran, where he attended the prestigious Mashhad University, focusing on literature and history. At this time, he began reading widely and was influenced by Persian literature and the works of thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Max Weber, and Karl Marx. His early engagement with Western intellectual thought, combined with his deep-rooted Islamic heritage, led him to question the nature of power, justice, and human existence. Shariati was particularly inspired by the Persian poet-philosopher, Allama Iqbal, whose ideas on selfhood and Islamic modernity shaped his own thinking. Iqbal's emphasis on the need for self-empowerment and the reconceptualization of Islam in the modern world resonated with Shariati deeply. Studies in Iran and abroad. Shariati's academic career took him to Tehran University, where he studied sociology. His interest in social theory and Marxism deepened here. In the early 1960s, Shariati went to Paris to continue his studies at the Sorbonne. In Paris, he studied sociology and attended lectures that were pivotal in shaping his synthesis of Western thought with Islamic principles. He was exposed to the ideas of existentialism, particularly the works of Jean-Paul Sartre, as well as Marxist theory, which he believed offered a critical lens through which to view class structures and social inequality. This time in Europe played a significant role in his intellectual development. Shariati interacted with leading intellectuals and revolutionaries and became particularly concerned with the social and political realities facing Iran and the broader Muslim world. In Paris, he also encountered the ideas of revolutionary thinkers like Frantz Fanon and Michel Foucault, whose critiques of colonialism and power dynamics resonated with his own work. 2. Philosophical foundations. Integration of Islam with social thought. Shariati believed that Islam, in its true essence, was inherently progressive and revolutionary. He was critical of both Western secularism and traditional interpretations of Islam that, in his view, had become tools of oppression. Shariati sought to reinterpret Islam as a force for social justice and political action. His primary goal was to engage Islamic thought with modernity and to promote an Islam that addressed the challenges of contemporary society, particularly issues of poverty, exploitation, and alienation. He rejected the passive, apolitical interpretations of Islam often espoused by the clergy and instead argued for an Islam that was dynamic, intellectual, and capable of inspiring social transformation. He focused on the revolutionary aspects of Islam, highlighting figures like Imam Ali and the Prophet Muhammad, who stood against injustice and oppression. Sociological influences. Shariati's engagement with Marxism and sociology was another significant influence on his thought. Unlike many Marxist thinkers, however, Shariati believed that Marxism could be harmonized with Islamic principles. He did not see Islam as inherently opposed to socialist ideals, but rather as a potential source of revolutionary action against imperialism and social inequality. He combined Marx's theory of class struggle with Islamic teachings of justice and equality. Shariati believed that, just as Marx identified the struggle of the proletariat as central to societal change, Islam emphasized the fight for justice and the liberation of the oppressed. His sociological approach sought to critique the socio-economic structures that perpetuated inequality and oppression, while proposing an alternative vision grounded in Islamic ethics. Influence of key thinkers. Shariati's work was profoundly shaped by the intellectual traditions of Marxism, existentialism, and Islamic thought. Marx's analysis of capitalism, class struggle, and the alienation of the worker had a deep impact on Shariati's social and political views. However, Shariati did not adopt Marxism wholesale. He adapted it to fit his understanding of Islam's potential to guide social transformation. At the same time, existentialist philosophers like Sartre had a strong influence on Shariati's thinking about individual freedom, human agency, and the quest for self-identity. Sartre's focus on the autonomy of the individual and the role of consciousness in shaping one's reality resonated with Shariati's belief that individuals must be active participants in their own liberation. 3. Shariati's critique of westernization and colonialism. Western imperialism and its effects on Iran. Shariati was deeply critical of the Western influence in Iran, especially during the reign of the Shah. He believed that Iran's political and economic systems had been overtaken by foreign powers, particularly the United States and Britain. This led to the erosion of Iranian cultural identity and autonomy. Shariati's critique of westernization was not merely about the cultural importation of Western ideals, but about the deeper structural and ideological domination imposed by colonial powers. He saw westernization as a form of cultural imperialism that had undermined Iranian traditional values and replaced them with foreign ideals that were ill-suited to the social realities of Iran. Western capitalism, in particular, was seen by Shariati as a system that served the interests of a global elite while exploiting the masses. Cultural alienation. Shariati argued that westernization had led to cultural alienation. The Western model of development, with its emphasis on materialism, individualism, and consumerism, had disrupted the Iranian social fabric. Traditional values, religious beliefs, and community-oriented practices were being replaced by a shallow, consumer-driven culture. For Shariati, this alienation was a key reason why the Iranian society was facing a crisis of identity. He believed that Iran's intellectual and cultural elites were complicit in this alienation, as they had embraced Western ideas without questioning their relevance to Iranian society. This intellectual elite, according to Shariati, was out of touch with the needs of the broader Iranian populace, which led to a growing disconnect between the people and the ruling classes. The need for cultural revival. In response to this cultural alienation, Shariati called for a revival of Iran's indigenous heritage. He did not advocate for a simple return to the past but emphasized the need to reconcile modernity with Iran's rich cultural and religious history. He proposed that Iran's cultural revival should be based on an authentic understanding of Islam, which could provide a foundation for a modern, just society. Shariati argued that the revival of Iran's cultural identity should not be limited to a rejection of westernization but should also involve a transformation of Iranian society through the lens of social justice and the empowerment of the oppressed. 4. Shariati's critique of traditionalism and religious establishment. Traditionalist religious thought. Shariati's critique of traditionalism focused on how religious institutions and practices had become entrenched in a system of power that maintained the status quo. He believed that traditional interpretations of Islam were being used by the religious establishment to justify the oppression of the people. In this context, the clergy was often aligned with the political elites, compromising their ability to challenge injustice. He criticized the rigid, dogmatic interpretations of Islam that ignored the revolutionary and social justice aspects of the faith. For Shariati, traditional religious thought had become too focused on rituals and theological debates, and not enough on social engagement and addressing the real struggles of the oppressed. Clericalism. Shariati was particularly critical of the Iranian clerical establishment. He saw the clergy as a conservative force that collaborated with the Pahlavi regime in maintaining power. He argued that the clergy had become too entrenched in political power and had abandoned their duty to advocate for the rights of the people. Shariati believed that the religious leadership should lead a social revolution, not just preach about piety and spiritual salvation. Reformist religious ideas. Shariati's vision of Islam was far from being anti-religious. Rather, he advocated for a reformulation of Islamic thought that could serve the cause of social justice and political change. He called for an interpretation of Islam that focused on the lives of ordinary people, drawing on the revolutionary principles of figures like Imam Ali and the Prophet Muhammad. Shariati believed that Islam was inherently a force for empowerment, and he sought to highlight its progressive dimensions. He urged Muslims to reclaim their religion from the hands of elites and use it as a tool for social transformation. 5. The concept of the new human and the role of the intellectual. The new human. One of Shariati's most important concepts was that of the new human. This ideal individual was someone who transcended the materialism and consumerism of modern society. The new human was self-aware, intellectually engaged, and committed to the transformation of both themselves and society. This person was not passive but actively sought justice and equality, rejecting both traditional dogmas and Western imperialist ideologies. Shariati believed that the creation of the new human required intellectual and spiritual renewal. This would allow individuals to live more fully, authentically, and purposefully. The new human would be empowered by knowledge and a deep sense of responsibility toward society. The role of the intellectual. Shariati viewed the intellectual as someone who must be engaged with society's struggles. Intellectuals, in his view, had a duty to challenge oppressive systems and to provide new ways of thinking. Rather than remaining detached from the world, intellectuals should engage in activism and seek to influence social change. Shariati himself played this role through his writings, lectures, and activism. He believed that the intellectual's task was not just to analyze but to transform, using their knowledge to foster revolutionary change and guide others toward a better, more just society. 6. Shariati's vision of social justice and revolution. Social justice as a key tenet of Shariati's thought. Shariati's commitment to social justice was at the core of his thought. He argued that true Islam is inseparable from justice, and that all forms of oppression, whether political, economic, or social, must be challenged. He was particularly focused on the plight of the oppressed classes, women, and marginalized groups in Iranian society. Shariati believed that revolution was necessary to overturn these injustices. He also emphasized that social justice was not just about addressing material inequality, but also about giving people dignity, freedom, and the ability to shape their own lives. Revolutionary change. Shariati did not see revolution merely as a political or economic process. He viewed it as a cultural, intellectual, and spiritual transformation. Revolution for Shariati was about changing how people think, act, and relate to each other. It required the dismantling of both physical structures of oppression and the ideologies that supported them. For Shariati, revolution meant an uprising of consciousness, a collective movement to reshape society based on the values of justice, equality, and freedom. Islam, in his view, was a powerful force that could guide such a revolution. The role of Islam in revolution. Shariati saw Islam as inherently revolutionary, with its messages of justice and the empowerment of the oppressed. He believed that the teachings of Islam could provide a moral and philosophical foundation for a just society. For Shariati, the Islamic Revolution was not just about changing political regimes, it was about creating a new social order, one that would prioritize the needs of the oppressed and the principles of social justice. 7. Shariati's political thought and the Iranian Revolution. Shariati's impact on the Iranian Revolution. Shariati's ideas played a significant role in shaping the intellectual foundation of the 1979 Iranian Revolution. His critiques of the Shah's regime, his call for social justice, and his reinterpretation of Islam inspired many students, intellectuals, and activists. His thoughts influenced the political discourse of the revolution, and many revolutionaries drew upon his works to justify their resistance against both the Pahlavi regime and Western imperialism. His emphasis on a socially engaged, politically active Islam resonated with the young, urban, and secular elements of the revolution, and his idea of a new human became a symbol of the revolutionary spirit. The intersection of religion and politics. Shariati's view of the relationship between religion and politics was central to his thought. He did not see religion as a private matter but as something that should inform political life. For him, the political struggle for justice and liberation was deeply rooted in the spiritual values of Islam. He believed that faith and politics could not be separated, they were two sides of the same coin. This perspective made Shariati an influential figure in the Iranian Revolution, as many believed his approach provided an alternative to both secularism and clericalism. Shariati's legacy in post-revolutionary Iran. Shariati's legacy continues to influence Iranian politics and intellectual thought. His ideas about social justice, revolution, and the empowerment of the oppressed have had lasting impacts on Iran's political landscape. While his role in the revolution was significant, his legacy has also been debated and reinterpreted in the post-revolutionary period, particularly with the rise of different political factions. Despite these debates, his vision of an engaged, conscious Islam continues to shape the discourse around political activism and religious reform in Iran. 8. Criticism and controversy. Despite his widespread influence and lasting legacy, Ali Shariati's ideas have not been without significant criticism. His thought is not only debated within Iranian intellectual circles but also has faced challenges from various political and religious groups. While his ability to merge Marxist theory with Islamic thought and to call for revolutionary change was lauded by many, others found flaws in his approach. These criticisms come from both religious conservatives and secular thinkers, as well as from those who followed different political ideologies. Let us explore the major critiques of Shariati's ideas. 1. Criticism of Shariati's Marxist-Islamic synthesis. One of the most prominent criticisms of Shariati's work revolves around his integration of Marxist theory with Islamic principles. While Shariati sought to combine the anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist aspects of Marxism with the social justice teachings of Islam, many felt that this synthesis was overly idealistic and theoretically incoherent. Ideological confusion. Critics argue that Shariati's attempt to combine Marxism, which is rooted in materialism and class struggle, with Islamic teachings, which emphasize spirituality and faith, was contradictory. Marxism, at its core, seeks to reject religion as an opiate of the masses, whereas Shariati attempted to demonstrate that Islam, in its revolutionary form, could be a tool for liberation. Many intellectuals questioned whether this fusion could truly work in practice, especially when the economic and social systems proposed by Marxism seemed at odds with the spiritual and ethical framework of Islam. Lack of a clear economic model. While Shariati was passionate about social justice and revolution, he did not provide a detailed or practical economic model in his writings. His ideas focused more on cultural and ideological change rather than concrete strategies for implementing socialism or economic justice. This lack of a clear, feasible blueprint for economic transformation left his Marxist Islamic vision open to critique. Critics often accused Shariati of neglecting the complexities of economic theory, opting for rhetoric that appealed to emotion rather than offering a systematic plan for overcoming capitalism. 2. Criticism from traditional religious scholars. Clericalism. Shariati's critique of the traditional religious establishment in Iran was one of the key sources of tension with conservative clerics. While he sought a reformulation of Islam that would align with the needs of modern society, many religious leaders saw his ideas as a threat to the traditional religious authority that they wielded. Rejection of clerical authority. Shariati was highly critical of the religious establishment in Iran, particularly the way that the clergy had become politically compromised. He accused them of being in league with the Shah's regime and of abandoning their duty to advocate for social justice. His calls for a more socially engaged, revolutionary form of Islam placed him at odds with many clerics, who viewed his rejection of the status quo as a challenge to their authority. Radical interpretation of Islam. While Shariati's views on Islam were seen as progressive and revolutionary by many, they were also viewed as radical and unorthodox by the religious establishment. Shariati's vision of Islam emphasized social justice, revolution, and personal empowerment, which did not always align with the more conservative interpretations of the religion. His emphasis on individual responsibility, especially in terms of social and political activism, was seen as undermining the hierarchical and authoritarian structure of traditional Islamic scholarship. 3. Criticism from secular thinkers and intellectuals. Though Shariati's Marxist Islamic synthesis was attractive to some leftist intellectuals, it was met with skepticism from many secular thinkers who believed that religion, especially Islam, had no place in a modern political or social system. Religious authority and revolution. Secular critics argued that Shariati's insistence on the centrality of Islam to the revolutionary struggle was problematic, as it tied political change to religious authority. In their view, this prevented the development of a truly secular, democratic society. For many secular intellectuals, Shariati's model was incompatible with the secular ideals of the Enlightenment and modern democracy, which prioritize reason and individual autonomy over religious orthodoxy. Potential for authoritarianism. Some critics, including secular Marxists, warned that Shariati's framework could lead to authoritarianism rather than freedom. They believed that his focus on a pure Islamic revolution and a theocratic state could pave the way for the kind of religious authoritarianism that many in the revolutionary movement hoped to avoid. They argued that, by giving Islam such a central place in the political order, Shariati's ideas might inadvertently strengthen the hand of the religious establishment. 4. Questioning Shariati's focus on cultural revolution. Shariati's primary focus was not on political or economic changes, but on a cultural revolution, a transformation of values, consciousness, and social awareness. His call for a new human who would transcend materialism, colonialism, and religious oppression was central to his vision. However, this emphasis on cultural transformation rather than practical political action or economic restructuring was seen as problematic by many. Cultural revolution versus practical politics. Critics argued that Shariati's emphasis on cultural change could be seen as abstract and detached from the material conditions that were driving the struggles of the Iranian people. While his call for a new human was inspiring, many saw it as an unrealistic vision that ignored the urgent need for political reform, economic justice, and tangible social policies. Some believed that a cultural revolution alone could not solve the economic and political crises facing Iran in the 1960s and 1970s. Idealism versus realpolitik. Shariati's idealism also led some to question whether his vision was too divorced from the realities of political power. The Iranian Revolution, after all, involved not only intellectual and cultural transformation but also military struggle, political alliances, and strategic maneuvering. Critics argued that Shariati's emphasis on individual awakening and cultural change failed to address the complexities of power dynamics and political strategy necessary to bring about revolution. 5. The incomplete implementation of Shariati's vision in post-revolutionary Iran. Shariati's vision of an Islamic revolution based on social justice, the empowerment of the oppressed, and the creation of a new human was never fully realized after the 1979 revolution. While his ideas influenced many revolutionaries, including figures within the Islamic Republic, the post-revolutionary period saw a deviation from many of his key principles. The role of the clergy in the new government. After the revolution, the clergy, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, took control of the Iranian state. While Khomeini claimed to follow Shariati's ideas, the government that emerged was not as socially progressive as Shariati had envisioned. The post-revolutionary Islamic Republic increasingly aligned itself with conservative clerical views, placing a heavy emphasis on religious authority and curbing some of the revolutionary ideals Shariati had championed. Authoritarian tendencies. Shariati's fear of authoritarianism in the name of religion became a reality for many after the revolution. The rise of an authoritarian theocratic regime, characterized by the suppression of dissent, limited political freedoms, and the imposition of strict Islamic laws, appeared to contradict the democratic and inclusive principles that Shariati had advocated for. His ideas about social justice and individual empowerment were often sidelined in favor of a centralized political system controlled by the clergy. 6. The struggle to preserve Shariati's legacy. Shariati's work has continued to influence Iranian political thought, but his legacy remains contested. Some view him as a visionary who sought to create a just society that integrated the best of both Islamic and Marxist thought. Others see him as an intellectual who was ultimately co-opted by political forces, whose vision was distorted in the aftermath of the revolution. Reinterpretations of Shariati. In the decades since his death, Shariati's ideas have been reinterpreted by various political and intellectual groups. Some have tried to reclaim his vision of an Islamic social justice movement, while others have criticized his work as too idealistic or disconnected from the realities of politics. His intellectual legacy remains alive, particularly in Iranian opposition movements that seek to balance faith with democratic principles. Conclusion. The criticism of Shariati's thought comes from various intellectual, political, and religious quarters. While his critique of imperialism, his call for social justice, and his revolutionary ideals resonate with many, others view his ideas as overly idealistic or impractical. Shariati's work continues to provoke debate in both Iran and the broader Middle East, and his legacy remains a subject of intense intellectual and political engagement. Despite the controversies surrounding his ideas, Shariati's call for a socially engaged, revolutionary form of Islam, and his insistence on the need for a personal and societal transformation, continue to inspire those who strive for justice, equality, and liberation.